Welcome to App-Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Luna Display and Perfect Tempo. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host, Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing really well. How's your WWDC?
Busy. That's what I would say.
There are a few things going on this week. I mean, we're recording this, I guess, on our last day, just about our last day together in San Jose, and we'll put this out after WWDC is over, but we've had a lot going on, including that fantastic interview you did last week with Craig Federighi of Apple.
Yeah, that was fun to do. Nice surprise for our listeners. I feel very lucky and happy that I was able to do this. I think it was a good conversation, especially the part about iPadOS and shortcuts. So that was fun. Lots to talk about, but why is there another person at this table right now?
Well, you know, at WWDC, we have most of the MacStories team here. We don't have Ryan, unfortunately, but we do have Alex Guyot, and he is here to talk to us all about the Apple Watch, because we're going to do today a App-tacular from WWDC. Welcome to App-Stories, Alex.
Hey, guys.
Hello.
Happy
Hi.
to be here.
Nice. Yeah, so there's lots to talk about, and I figured, we're going to have the whole summer to consider the changes in iOS 13, iPadOS, watchOS, version
6.
6. John is going to try out CarPlay because he's the only one with a CarPlay-enabled car, fancy car. Why don't we start from Notes, John?
Sure. I want to talk a little bit about Notes because Notes is something that we've used at MacStories a fair amount, especially the shared notes. But at times it would get a little difficult when you had a lot of notes because you have had a lot of shared notes that get scattered all over the system, hard to find them. You could keep them in a separate folder, but you had to do all of that manually. There are a lot more new tools in Notes that I think are going to be very useful and make this work a lot better for us and a lot of other people. Because first of all, a lot of this comes down to folders because you can now manually reorder your folders. Before, they would just be alphabetically categorized. So you would have to, if we had a MacStories folder, I'd have to scroll all the way down to the M's in order to get at those notes. And shared, I had a shared folder with all my shared notes, and that was near the bottom, which is just hard to get to. And I'd like to have.
You can do this now?
I'd like to have the shared ones right at the top.
Yeah. You can do this now. Oh, this is very nice. You know what I used to do? To get some folders in the old version of Notes,
You'd add an asterisk, I bet.
I would have either an asterisk or an emoji. But the thing about emoji or Unicode characters is that you can tell what the underlying label is. So I kept trying different emoji until one of them floated the folder up to the top of the sidebar. So it was all kind of random.
Yeah. So now you can manually sort, which is fantastic. So it's effectively like pinning your favorite folders at the top. The other thing that's really handy is that you can share folders. So now, instead of having 10 shared notes with Federico scattered all across my list of notes, we can just share a folder, and anything we drop in there will be shared, which is a really nice addition. And the final thing about Notes that I wanted to mention is that there are now nested folders. So you can have 2 levels of hierarchy.
Yeah. And something that I noticed yesterday, so I just put the beta of iPadOS on my iPad. Something that I noticed is that finally, we mentioned this at some point in the past, you can save tweets from iOS
right.
to Notes, and they behave like on macOS. So they show you the preview of the tweet with like an image and the text of the tweet and the username of the author, I think. Used to be that on macOS, you would get this rich preview. But on iOS, you would only get a blank cell that said twitter.com.
Right.
So that was fixed. And also the share extension for Notes has been improved. It's now bigger, so you have a bigger text field. You can still choose to append or create a new note, but it's bigger. You can browse your entire folder structure, and you can dismiss it with a downward swipe, which is a new gesture in iOS 13 and iPadOS because of the new card-based UI that they have.
Right.
So that's nice.
There's also with the checklists that you can do inside of Notes, you can drag and drop them to reorder them, which is a really nice feature.
Yeah.
Federico, why don't you tell us a little bit about reminders?
Reminders is all new, finally. We were hoping this would be the case. Last major version was in iOS 7. The textured paper is gone.
Hooray.
Yeah, that's nice.
That's still in notes, but in reminders is no more. As we saw in the leaks a few weeks ago, there's a sidebar that contains 4 shortcuts at the top for tasks that have been scheduled for today, all of your scheduled tasks, all of your tasks, regardless of their date, and your flagged tasks. You can also have lists, and what is new in reminders this time is that you can create groups of multiple reminders lists. So I just upgraded to the new reminders app on iPadOS, which, by the way, changes the format of your reminders, I think.
No, really.
You got a big warning when you do that in the beta. Says it's sort of like when Apple made some changes to iCloud Drive a few years ago
Right.
that they would break on Mountain Lion or something on your other devices. And basically they say if you upgrade now, it's going to be incompatible with your other devices. And I think this actually breaks some third-party clients like GoodTask, maybe. In any case, I now have 2 groups. One is called MacStories that contains articles, shortcuts, and iOS review. These are 3 reminders lists that I have. And I also have family lists, which contains family, grocery, and pharmacy for things we gotta buy or do with Sylvia.
Right.
This is very nice. They're not projects in the sense that if you tap on the group, you don't get like a breakdown of all tasks from all sublists. It's just a folder. So it's a nice visual grouping in the sidebar. Lots of changes in terms of how you can edit the metadata of a reminder. So there's basic natural language support, which is kind of weird because it's not like Fantastical that you can just type and you assign the different parameters. When you type something like tomorrow or today, it gets highlighted in blue. You still gotta hit a button in the quick type bar suggestions for that suggestion to become an actual date field. You can assign, though, this is quite awesome. You can assign locations. You can say from a new shortcuts bar.
Right.
You can say things like, remind me to do something the next time I have an iMessage conversation with John. This is not working now because it's beta 1, but there are screenshots on the Apple website, so it should work. What else is new?
I think it's important to kind of point out that bar at the bottom, because that's very new, and there's a lot you can do with it because there's 4 buttons, right? There's location, dates. What are the other ones?
Flags,
right. And you can go and you can tap any of those, and there's some built-in options there. And that's also the place where you go, as Federico said, where you use the natural language. Something gets highlighted in blue, and it does a suggestion bar, a little bit like how autocorrect works, I suppose. Where you see
it's like how the emoji autofill works right now.
Yes, right, exactly.
You can also do things like remind me the next time I'm in my car. So I assume it uses either CarPlay or Car Bluetooth. And you can also do subtasks, which is interesting because this is part of the new format of reminders.
Right.
So a reminder can have multiple items, multiple tasks attached to it. So it's sort of like, I want to see how, besides the simple reminders, like remind me to take out the trash or something, if you can use it for more advanced use cases, and maybe I could be able to drop those third-party clients.
Right.
Something quite nice that we're going to see, this is App-Stories. We talk about apps. Something that Apple does for reminders, for shortcuts, and for developers is SF symbols. SF symbols is a new set of scalable built-in icons. So glyphs that there's hundreds of them that Apple baked into iOS 13 and iPadOS that they're going to use in some of their apps. So for example, now you can switch the icon assigned to a reminders list, or you can see these new glyphs in shortcuts. And developers can also use these new icons. So from a visual standpoint, they're quite nice, and they're part of the San Francisco font family.
Yeah, it'll be make it a little more coherence between third-party and first-party apps, which is going to be nice because you can, especially when you're customizing these in different apps, you can create kind of a similar look for across various apps. I like that a lot. I think that's kind of interesting. Have you looked, Federico, yet? If you, for instance, do a subtask in iOS 13 beta, what does it look like if you go back to iOS 12? Do you see that subtask?
I have not been that brave.
Okay, I was going to say because you're not syncing back to that at all. Then
I can tell you. Oh, this is not my phone. This is your phone. See, this is why it's different to record podcasts in person.
You grab other people's phones.
Yes, I am looking now. I'm opening reminders, and yeah, they don't sync back.
That is what the scary dialogue told us. The one that
because
Federico accepted immediately
I
without thinking about it.
made a horrible mistake. I accidentally tapped yes. And now my reminders are not syncing anymore between 12 and 13.
Okay, yeah, it is probably worth just pausing for a moment and telling people that this is pretty buggy. I know.
Please don't do it.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that just kind of don't work and break, and you can end up with a lot of shortcuts that don't work, because I know a lot of Federico's many hundreds of shortcuts aren't working right now.
Well, it's not that they're not working. I'm going to talk about it later. They require manual fixing each of them.
Right.
All 160 or
Yes.
200 of them. So that should be fun.
Presumably they'll sort that out before the main release
Hopefully.
comes out.
Yes, in theory, they should be able to have this migration process where all of your old shortcuts will migrate, because shortcuts also switches the file format. So hopefully that should work. But in beta 1, don't install it on your primary devices. Don't be like me. But because this is a podcast and you want to hear about it, that's what I did. So
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by our friends at Luna Display. Having extra space when you're working from your Mac is super useful. It can make any tiresome task a lot more enjoyable just by removing the tab switching frustration. Well, iPads have stunning displays, right? And maybe you're starting to like the idea of having another screen for your Mac. Luna Display lets you do just that with just a tiny bit of hardware. You don't have to buy an extra display, you use your iPad instead. Luna Display provides crystal clear image quality, reliable performance, and wireless flexibility. You just pop in a little bit of hardware into your Mac and you're good to go. And if you don't have Wi-Fi, you can also connect to using a USB cable. And the great thing about Luna Display is how portable your new setup is, so you can be more productive at the office, in the studio, or when you travel. It's a super smart way to work with more screen real estate while you're on the go. Luna also acts as a complete extension of your Mac. It's going to support your external keyboard as well as your Apple Pencil and touch interactions. Yes, you can interact with your Mac with just a swipe of your finger. It's really, really cool. And the all-new Liquid Video Engine brings significantly reduced latency and a faster screen refresh rate. I use my Luna Display all the time. It's one of those things where I can be anywhere in my house, anywhere my Wi-Fi reaches, even out in the backyard. I've got a Mac Mini with a Luna Display connected to it. It sits on my desk in the basement of my house where I work, but I can work on any floor of the house, out in the yard, anywhere I am, and still be on my Mac, even though all I've got with me is my iPad Pro. It's a fantastic experience. Listeners of App Stories can get an exclusive 10% discount on Luna Display. Just go to lunadisplay.com and enter the promo code STORIES at checkout. Again, that's lunadisplay.com and the promo code STORIES at checkout. Don't put this off any longer. Go there right now. That's lunadisplay.com and the promo code STORIES for 10% off. Our thanks to Luna Display for their support of the show.
Alex, what is new in watchOS?
Oh, watchOS is a very big update this year. I kind of slid under the radar a little bit since that keynote was moving so quickly.
And for context, you've been doing watchOS reviews on MacStories since version
2, which was essentially version 1. It came out. It was announced 2 months after the watch shipped. So
that's right.
I didn't have a lot of time to do version 1 yet. But I've been reviewing watchOS for MacStories since watchOS 2. And it's been really interesting to watch that operating system evolve. They did not get it right at first. It took them a few years, which I think was widely known. But I mean, watchOS 2 completely rewrote everything. watchOS 3 changed a ton of system level stuff. And then it wasn't really until watchOS 4 that they kind of got into a groove and got things in the right spots, where they've stayed since then. So this year with watchOS 6, they've really told a huge story about making the Apple Watch independent from the iPhone to a much larger degree than it has been before. And this is a story that they've been pursuing for a few years now. Basically since watchOS 4, when they got the operating system kind of where they wanted it to be. They've been working to, they added cellular. I mean, this is a hardware and a software story that they've been telling. And this year, for the first time, you can actually have a watch app that is completely independent from the iPhone. So you can have someone install an Apple Watch app and not have the iPhone version of that app running on your phone, which for a lot of apps that can potentially be big for them, such as apps that integrate with the fitness stuff. A lot of times you really can just push all of that data into the health app, and you don't really need to write your own full iPhone interface for that. But previously, those apps have had to have that. So I think it'll be a lot easier for developers now, potentially, to just push something that's going to be on your Apple Watch, do something like maybe sleep monitoring, something that Apple's not tackling, or something that you want to tackle in a better way than Apple. And you can just focus right in on the watch, which is what you probably want to be doing there.
That's awesome. And there's an app store.
Yeah, exactly.
On the watch.
There is now an app store on the watch. It's very small, and
but they did a good job, I think, with the cards.
They did.
And
it looks really nice. I mean, you're going to be able to search it, obviously, through Siri or through dictation or through Scribble if you want to scribble out some app
names. Have you ever been?
names.
Sometimes you're just walking around and you're like, you know what? I want to scribble on my watch and search for an app.
Exactly. And now when you have that motivation, you can do something about it. And you don't have to pull your phone out. Yeah, I mean, it is, jokes aside, it's a big step for the watch to have the App Store on it because, again, this story that they're just pounding in this year of independence from that iPhone.
Right.
And, I mean, I don't know that we know quite where they're going with that yet, but as the hardware continues to get more and more advanced, this is an operating system that's being freed from its constraints, which is really cool to see.
Yeah, this is great. And we also have new watch faces, but not custom watch faces.
No, not custom watch faces. And I mean, they were, they announced new watch faces as they do every year. The watch face story, I think, is interesting this year because they've been pushing the Siri face for 2 years now.
Yes.
That was announced in watchOS 4, and it had a big update in watchOS 5. They've really been pushing on that machine learning interface. And this year, we didn't see anything said about that face, which is a little too bad because I mean, I've said in my watchOS reviews, I don't really like the face, but I really like where they're trying to go with it. They're trying to have the watch start more intelligently surfacing data to you that you want to see when you want to see it. And it hasn't really quite been there with the Siri face, but it's a direction that would be very good for the watch because the less you have to tap it, the less you have to navigate around in that small interface, the better. And so if they can start showing you things without you having to do anything first, that's great. But unfortunately, this year, we didn't see any movement on that face. We did see some nice looking new faces. There's a California dial that I think is going to be pretty nice and pretty popular. And that one has, I think, 4, maybe 5 complications, which is good. For a while, they were pushing so many of those faces that had like 1 or no complications. And that was, I think that was a bad story to be telling developers just because if you're trying to get people to make these complications, but then half the faces out there don't have them, that's not great. But this year, very different on that note. So every face, it looks like, has at least 4 complications that they've pushed. They have a new gradient face that is, I mean, very simple. It's just the hands moving around and a gradient kind of follows them. They have that California dial face I mentioned. They have a new solar face, which looks pretty nice. And it does actually have complications, which was one of the problems with the old solar face. But, if you want to see where the sun's at throughout the day,
sometimes you're just walking around and you wonder, where's the sun?
Exactly.
You can't look up in the sky.
No, definitely not. And you can also spin the dial and see the sun move around. So you basically can control time with this watch face.
Sure, you can think that. Sure.
What I thought was interesting about the gradient one is that there's really 2 modes. There's the non-complication mode, I think, right, where it's just the gradient face. And then if you add complications, instead of consuming the entire face, it goes down to a circle. Is that right? And then it has the complications in the corners.
Exactly. And that's the same thing the California dial face does too. So if you don't need complications, which some people don't want, some people want their watch faces a lot simpler, that's an option that they're dealing with a lot better now. In some of the older faces, if you didn't have a complication there, it was just blank space.
Right.
And now if you don't have a complication on some of these faces, they'll just fill up that environment. Which is very nice for the people who want to keep it a little more simplistic and don't necessarily want data on their watch face all the time.
Any other changes to built-in apps?
Oh, yeah. We've got some new built-in apps. So voice memos for the first time has made its way to the watch, which is, I mean, that's really nice. That's one of the spots that I really think a native app can shine on the watch is just you're walking around for real this time, and you want to record something really quickly, and now you can do that on your watch, and you can do that without the iPhone present, which is, that's really nice. And then we have a new noise app on the watch, which is one of these that's kind of constantly running in the background now, and it's monitoring your noise environment.
Okay.
And it's basically monitoring the decibel level around you to try and determine when the noise is loud enough that it could be damaging to your hearing.
Okay.
And then it'll let you know, it'll give you a ping on your wrist and inform you that you're in an environment that if you stay in it for too long, you could sustain damage to your hearing. And I mean, I don't think people are probably going to be running out of an environment just because of the noise, but I think it's a really good extra piece of data to have, just to know if you're not really aware of what's kind of going around you, but you're in a loud area, then you can be aware that maybe you should get out of here before too long in this environment. So I mean, if you go to a concert, yeah, it's going to be loud. You're aware of that. But if you're just like walking through a construction site or something, you might not be aware of the noise environment around you. So I think that's a good piece of data to have for people. And you can also add that as a complication on your watch face if you're really sensitive about noise around you, and just kind of see the decibel level at all times, which is, I don't know, kind of interesting.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Perfect Tempo for iOS. Perfect Tempo is the perfect practice tool for musicians and dancers. It lets you slow down or speed up your favorite songs without affecting the pitch, so you can play or dance along at your own pace. And for the very first time, Apple Music subscribers can change the tempo of over 50 million songs streamed straight to Apple Music. That's a big deal. No other app is doing this right now. Apple Music subscribers can slow down or speed up Apple Music with Perfect Tempo. In the past, other apps have required you to go out and buy the song, download it, and then use it. But if you subscribe to Apple Music, you're already set with Perfect Tempo. On top of that, you can speed up or slow down any song in your iPhone's music library or from iCloud Drive, Dropbox, and other cloud services. It's got a lot of flexibility too. You can choose to repeat the whole song or just one section of it over and over while you're learning a tricky part of the song. It makes it much easier to get down perfectly. And Perfect Tempo keeps your recently played songs right up front in the UI, so it's easy to go back to them next time you practice. If you're an Apple Watch user, you can control the tempo, volume, and repeat right on your wrist too. Perfect Tempo really is the ideal practice companion for musicians and dancers, with access to the entire Apple Music catalog as well as your own music on your iPhone. And in the cloud, it opens up a whole new world of possibilities. Perfect Tempo for iOS is available on the App Store, and make sure you check out the Musicians Bundle, which includes Perfect Tempo and the award-winning recording app Just Press Record for a reduced price. Check out the show notes for a link to Perfect Tempo. Perfect Tempo. Any song, any tempo. Our thanks to Perfect Tempo for their support of App Stories.
All right, so let's talk about shortcuts.
Yes.
Shortcuts is built in iOS 13 and iPadOS.
All right, well, what does that mean, Federico? What does that get you?
It's a system app, so you don't need to download it from the App Store anymore. And this also brings some benefits in terms of what kind of access to the system Shortcuts gets.
Okay.
One of them, which I think is a bit controversial right now, controversial for me. So, it's not like there's millions of people making it a controversy, but I want to make it. So
let's start it right here then.
Okay.
This is where it begins.
So in the older, in iOS 12, you used to have the Shortcuts extension to run shortcuts from the share sheet. Now, in iOS 13, the share sheet is all new and Shortcuts is built in. What this means is that Apple got rid of the Shortcuts extension that you needed to tap, and then it brought up the grid within the share sheet.
Right.
Now, every shortcut that you have marked as share sheet compatible lives at the top level of the share sheet. So instead of having shortcuts, then tap that, then open the grid, you now have all of your share sheet shortcuts. I know it's complicated, but just open the share sheet in the beta and you'll see. All of your shortcuts are right there, top level. So it's one tap less.
They are in a list view now rather than so you don't have to scroll horizontally across those icons like you used to. Although there are still some of that, but these ones are going to be in a big list right underneath some of the previous share sheet stuff.
Yeah. Now the share sheet is has two different orientations. Like you have the people and the share extensions. horizontally, and you have the what used to be called the action extensions. They're now a list. And all of your shortcuts are now part of this list. The problem is that this list could use some color differentiation because right now everything looks the same. For example, in Safari, all of these items in this list are blue with super tiny icons and doesn't show you the same UI of your shortcuts library, because the old shortcuts extension, when you tap that, you would see the grid with all of your shortcuts, all of your custom colors, all of your custom icons. Now everything is blue. Or if you're in Apple Music, these list items are pink. And I think it's a little visually difficult to parse and
Agreed.
to, quickly get to one of your shortcuts.
It does use those icons we were talking about earlier, so you can set the new icons on the side for each shortcut that you want to use. So that is going to be similar across apps, but the icons themselves are, not super visually distinct. And when you make them all the exact same color, it's very difficult to parse anything out of that list.
Yeah. Another change, and this is one that I actually like, is that in iOS 13 and iPadOS, Apple is merging Siri shortcuts and the Shortcuts app. So your Siri shortcuts, your little voice activation phrases, they are gone from settings. Everything lives in the Shortcuts app. Everything is managed either in the library, which is called My Shortcuts, or the gallery, where you will be able to add shortcuts as you previously would in settings. There's a new section called Shortcuts from Your Apps. This is where you will find suggestions like a website that you recently opened, or a note from Apple Notes, or an iMessage thread. Everything lives inside of the Shortcuts app. Now, because everything lives inside of the Shortcuts app and the Shortcuts app is built into the system, Apple was able to make some changes to the Siri UI when you want to add a custom phrase to a shortcut. You don't need to record a phrase anymore with your voice. You can just type the custom phrase. And because shortcuts now support parameters, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, you can actually modify the shortcut while you're adding it to Siri. And when you do, you get the same UI of the shortcuts editor. So let's say that you are in, Carrot Weather, and you want to add a shortcut to check the weather for next week. But then you change your mind. You're like, no, I actually want to check the weather for tomorrow. And assuming that the date is a parameter, you can modify the shortcut right there before adding the phrase to Siri and say, change this parameter from next week to tomorrow. And when you do that, the UI is the same of the shortcuts editor from the Shortcuts app. So it's a way that, because it's built right into the system, that UI can now live in more places. It can be a system feature, not just an app from the App Store. And it sort of feels like the Shortcuts team passed some kind of test. Like, yes, you guys did a good job. Now you can be part of the system.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting, because otherwise, in another context, you'd have to start that shortcut all over again. Because when you decided, you wanted to make it tomorrow instead of last week, you'd have to just kind of tear down whatever you created and start fresh. Whereas now, as you said, you just pick from whatever the parameters are that are included with that action and modify it as you go along. That's great.
Now, of course, that's assuming that the developer actually takes the time to support parameters. Parameters are going to have such huge ramifications for automation and shortcuts in iOS 13. They are used extensively in the Shortcuts app with the built-in actions by Apple.
Right.
The Shortcuts editor is all new. It takes a while to get used to this new system of creating shortcuts. Now, as I mentioned before, in theory, all of your old shortcuts should migrate correctly to this new format. But the basic gist of this system is that Apple got rid of the idea of get variable and passing input to a following action, because now every action has parameters, and parameters look like fields that you can tap into and decide what they should contain. And the way that this looks visually is sort of like natural language. So to give you an example, instead of doing get variable, get images from the variable, you can just say photos and videos. This is a new action. Get images from, and then you tap in. There's a blue token, and you can just choose where to get the images from. And just looking around at the Shortcuts editor, you see all of these little natural language sentences. Those are the parameters, and it's a very it's a big change from the old way of doing things.
Yeah, it really is. It's a great change, though, because when you think about it, because you're doing is instead of having to store that data in a variable that you create, all that information rides along with the actions, and it can be,
Yes.
as you said, a whole bunch of different things depending on how many parameters are supported by an action, and it's all there and gets passed automatically to whatever your next step in your shortcut is.
Exactly. So you don't have to do like the multiple steps every time, which was it worked, but it was a bit clunky to have like 3 steps, 3 actions for just do a simple thing like resizing an image, for example. Now you can do it all in one action. The same action contains parameters for what is the image and what is the size, and you can just get it all down there.
Right. And so the end result of that is that you can just really shrink down the number of actions that you have in these,
Yes.
especially in these big complicated shortcuts. It can really, really help. And I think Federico has counted out some of his to give us a sense of how much we can kind of collapse these things now.
Yeah, the Apple Frames shortcut, which is the one that we use for putting iOS screenshots into iPhones and iPad frames, it went from 160 actions to 132 actions. So in just 30 minutes.
Yeah, didn't take you long at all.
Yeah, so this is a massive saving in terms of like how much code, because it is effectively code, that you can remove from your shortcuts. And this, well, I should stress that this is awesome for long and complicated shortcuts, but this is fantastic for simple shortcuts, because shortcuts don't have to be complex to be useful. You can create a shortcut that maybe just does one thing, and it's a time-saving shortcut to get the weather, or I don't know, turn off your lights. And having these parameters just makes it so much easier to say, do something specific or change the value of something without having to do the dance of get variable, set variable, all these multiple blocks. Which is really, really nice.
Right. I think it is going to really make shortcuts more approachable for a lot of newer people who are coming into it, because it wasn't really intuitive to have to, set a block that was a variable and then get that variable and then put it into the next thing. And so now with this much more collapsed interface, you can make a simple shortcut that does something interesting with just one block, which is exactly what people would have expected. And now you can read the natural language sentence and just kind of be like, oh, I wanted to do this simple thing. That's exactly what this block tells me it's going to do, and that's exactly what it does.
Yeah.
And you can do it with just one block now. And it's going to be really, really great for getting people into shortcuts, for just making shortcuts for yourself. It's just great all around.
Yeah, it reminds me sort of like when you do a search in the Finder, and you want to do like you have like those
little tokens,
these little tokens. And when you construct a search and you look at the search field, you can see this mix of plain text and those blue tokens. And it's sort of like that. It's sort of like natural language applied to visual programming, but in a way that it's not as cumbersome and clunky as it used to be. So yeah, just visually speaking, looking around, it's very different. Like the first 10 minutes, I was like, okay, this is like a shock to me. I don't know what I'm doing. But then the more you dig into these new actions, the more you're like, yeah, this actually makes sense.
Right. You're no longer having to worry so much about data control and data flow, which is really nice. And I think your example of resizing a photo is a really good one, because that's one that did take a few steps to do. And now that would be just one action, really, right? That you set the parameters just for the size and where you're getting the image from.
A good way to think about it is every action has parameters, and everything is a magic variable. That's really what they've done. So you can pick variables from anywhere. They're automatically created, and every action has a field that you can tap into and say, okay, yeah, I want a photo to be in here.
Yeah.
So that's awesome.
This is probably a good place, too, for another beta warning, because if you do go down the road of doing the iOS 13 beta,
oh, yes.
Federico, why don't you explain what that can mean in terms of syncing shortcuts?
If you're keeping some devices on iOS 12, but you want to try the new shortcuts in 13 or iPadOS, make sure that you disable iCloud Sync on the device on iOS 12, because you do not want to have shortcuts from 13 or iPadOS syncing back to 12, in that they will become unusable, because the new version of shortcuts changes the underlying format of your shortcuts. So if those shortcuts sync back to the older devices, they will stop working. So when I upgraded my iPad, I disabled shortcuts iCloud Sync on iOS 12. My phone is still running on iOS 12. And so now I have 2 separate sets of shortcuts.
Right.
But they're still working both on the older version and on my iPad running 13.
Okay.
One quick mention before we wrap up the show. Shortcuts, of course, has. We're gonna have the entire summer to talk about this stuff, but there's automation in Shortcuts now. So Apple really did a good job here. It's not just like time and location triggers. You can now run your shortcuts automatically based on a variety of triggers. They're called personal automations. For example, of course, there's the time of day, and there's a location, and it's sort of like HomeKit, for example. But there's CarPlay as a trigger. There's alarm clock as a trigger. So when you stop your alarm clock in the morning, a shortcut can run automatically. Airplane mode, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, do not disturb, low power mode, NFC stickers.
Right.
All of these can be triggers. Even when you open an app, it can be a trigger. And this is the joke that I've been saying here all week at WWDC. I'm going to create an automation that whenever I open Twitter, it's going to play some super relaxing music. So that when I look at my mentions and what's new, it's going to calm me down instantly. I think this is going to be awesome. And Apple did a really good job in selecting an initial set of potential triggers. Some of them will be automatic. Some of them will send you notification that you need to confirm. A good way to think about this is anything that you do manually can run a shortcut automatically in the background. So you stop your alarm clock, the shortcut can run in the background. You will not get the notification. Or you open an app or you scan an NFC sticker, the shortcut will run in the background. But if an environmental variable changes, like
location, right?
Location, time of day, something that you didn't manually do. It's not like you're manually advancing time. You will need to confirm the shortcut from a notification. So that's
will be
interesting to see. Yeah.
All right, Federico. I think that's probably a good place to stop for the day. We have got so much to talk about all summer, but I think that's a good overview of some of the favorite things that we've seen. So first of all, I'd like to thank Alex for joining us because this is the first time we've had another MacStories member on App Stories. Thanks for coming, Alex.
My pleasure.
Where can people find you on Twitter?
I'm at _AXX on Twitter. Don't ask me about the handle. It's fine. It's an old one.
People can find you there.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And I want to thank our two sponsors again. That's Luna Display and Perfect Tempo. And you can, of course, find me and Federico. We're both over at MacStories.net writing, as is Alex from time to time. And you can find me and Federico on Twitter and Instagram. Federico is at Viticci, that's VITICCI, and I'm at John Voorhees, JOHNVOORHEES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.